Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today we're going to be going over the 2020 presidential election, how I think it's going to unfold on election night. So we'll go by poll closing times, looking at both the presidential and Senate elections, and going through I'll explain what might be said at certain times and all that jazz. If you were expecting some sort of animated graphic, like we're pretending to be CNN or MSNBC or something, like certain more subscribed YouTubers might, that's not going to be happening here. Mostly because it just occurred to me to do this idea about 3 minutes ago, and I don't think I can assemble a template to do that in that amount of time. So let's start off at the 6 p.m. poll closings with Indiana and Kentucky. So in the presidential election, both of these will be called instantly. No contest. If there's any type of kerfuffle, it'll be in Kentucky, but there probably won't be any unless there's a massive wave going on. However, in the Senate election, it will most likely be called for Mitch McConnell right away. Right away. However, if there's any sort of wave-level confuddlery, keep in mind Mitch McConnell's going to win this election. It could take a few minutes for this to happen. However, it will be red. We'll now go to 6:59 p.m., right before the 7 p.m. poll closings, right when Nate Silver, because of whatever model 538 is using to try and predict who's going to win the election the night of, gets peak Twitter death threats for what he's put on his, whatever he's done on his channel, and then they freeze the model for 5 minutes to tinker with it. That hasn't happened multiple times before at all. I think it's only happened once. But anyway, to the 7 p.m. poll closings, let's start with the big guy, Florida. In Florida, unless there is some sort of massive, weird indiscretion, Florida's going to be pretty close when they first announce, too close to call, but it will be looking favorable to the Republicans. No Senate race in Florida right now. Same story with Georgia, except I'm imagining it's going to look a little bit more red on the offset. However, same will go for both of its elections. However, Democrats will look a little bit better in the special election. Keep in mind, Democrats will just be going to the runoff here, so I will just be indicating between Laufer and Collins, between who I think has the best chance of winning out of the two Republicans. So it'll initially be in favor of Laufer. Now over to South Carolina, where presidential will be immediately called for Donald Trump, but the Senate election will be too close to call, with a slight edge towards Lindsey Graham. Two more states will be completely called at this point in time, Virginia and Vermont. They also have 7 p.m. poll closings, and Virginia will be called blue for the Democrats. It's at this point we're going to start seeing some of the House results coming in, and I wouldn't be shocked if by the 7:30 poll closings, which we're about to hit, the House is called for the Democrats. So, for 7:30, we have North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. At this point in time, the governor's race will be called in North Carolina for the Democrats. However, in the House, in the Senate and presidential races, it will be too close to call. Initially, I think favoring Democrats for both the presidential and the Senate races. However, it's a little bit with the Democrats having more of a head in the Senate race. Ohio will be too close to call, with a slight edge towards the Republicans again. West Virginia will be called for both races immediately. It's also at this point in time we're going to see some more votes trickle in Kentucky, and people will make the claim, maybe Amy McGrath, especially as the big cities come in, maybe she can make up the ground. She won't make up the ground. She won't. People will say she can. She won't. We now come to the 8 p.m. poll closings, and that's when we're going to get our most, and we're actually going to revise our states that are too close to call for right now. First, we have Alabama, which will be immediately called at the presidential level, and I believe at the Senate level, it won't be called immediately, but it's going to be super in favor of the Republican. Next to Connecticut, that one will be safe and called for the Democrat in the presidential race. Delaware will be called for Joe Biden in both presidential and, learn it doesn't transmit between the two, and Senate. Illinois will be called, and for the record, I just realized I'm using Eastern Standard Time here. I hope no one was going, oh, this is late, this is Central Standard Time. No, this is East Coast time. So if you're on the West Coast, where this is going to be, you're just have finished your lunch at this point. Illinois is next. Illinois will go blue in both races. Safe call. And it's at this point, if the House hasn't been called, the House will be called for the Democrats. Now we get to Maine, the first really competitive state here. Maine's all district should be called immediately, and the first district as well. The second district will be up in the air, but I think it'll be tilting towards the Democrats initially. Maine's Senate election won't be called immediately, but it will be looking favorable towards Democrats, much like North Carolina and the rest of the southern states. Down to Maryland, which will be immediately called for the Democrats. Massachusetts will also be called for the Democrats. As you can see, now the Democrats start to look good on the electoral vote. Michigan will also come into play, and it will not be called immediately. However, it will be heavily leaning in favor of the Democrats, while I believe the Senate race will be in a similar position, not immediately ready to be called, but barring a significant upset, it's gonna probably go to the Democrats. Mississippi will be called both the Senate and presidential races. Missouri will be called. I think it's not going to wait around. I know it's supposed to be closer, but it won't be. I could see the governor's race hanging on at this sort of likely, like, oh, it might go, but probably it might be competitive, but it's not going to flip. New Hampshire should be called almost immediately as well, both the Senate and presidential races. Still doing 8 p.m. right now, and 8 p.m., as you can tell, is the really big poll closings. Over to New Jersey, which will be called for the Democrats. This is really reinforcing Democrats on the Northeast. Yeah. North Dakota, I think, should be called. Yeah. So we run into the problem of we're dealing with different time zones at this point, and also keep in mind, if you're in a different time zone, some of the states' info may not come at the full time. I'm doing the initial state time. So, for example, North Dakota has some Central time, some Midwest, or not Midwest, Western time zone, Rockies. As such, I'm just going to go with their Central time. And at this point, North Dakota will be called for the Republicans. Kansas will also be called for the Republicans at the presidential level. However, at the Senate level, it won't be called, though it will have a significant favorability to the Republicans, but not an insurmountable lead. Oklahoma also will be called for the Republicans at both levels. Now the fun one, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will not be called immediately. However, it will initially show Republicans, namely Trump, with a decent-sized lead in the state, if I'm guessing how they're going to read ballots. Next, we get Rhode Island, which will immediately go blue. And South Dakota will also be called, both times for the Republican. I will make a note here. We could see South Dakota initially start off like this. However, I'm willing to bet it will be called almost immediately. Tennessee, given the high turnout, I'm actually willing to bet Tennessee won't start off being called in either race. It will start off as oh, maybe. And then, well, no. And we'll start getting our trickle-in votes from Texas. I'm going to wait till Texas's next poll closing before I make a call on Texas. But we will get a little bit of info coming in, and it's going to have some mixed results when we get the Texas numbers. However, for one last seat for the Democrats, D.C. will, of course, go for the Democratic Party and immediately be called. Our southern states will also begin with more trickle-in to look more likely for certain candidates. So North Carolina will look more competitive. Florida, at this point, I'm actually guessing, will look a little bit more red. Georgia will look more competitive, and at this point, it's going to become a lot clearer that Loeffler probably holds a slight edge over Collins, but it's pretty clear. Or that this race is still up in the air between the two Republicans, but Warnock is going to the runoff. Ossoff will have also tightened this race, and I wouldn't be shocked if South Carolina gets even tighter. Not blue, but tighter. The Senate race will also look a lot more competitive at this point for North Carolina, and Alabama will be called for the Republican. Now the 8:30 poll closing, which is Arkansas, auto call for the Republicans, no problem. However, at this point, I'm pretty sure states such as Michigan and Tennessee will be called for their respective parties. Not much will have changed. Ohio at this point will also start looking a little bit more bluish as we get the initial front loading from the cities. Now on to the 9 p.m. poll closing, starting with Arizona, which will look a little bit reddish when starting off for the presidential, but a little bit bluish, a little more than a little bit, but bluish for the Senate race. Colorado will instantly be called for the Democrats at the presidential level. It will be instantly called for the Democrats. At the Senate level, it will probably only be likely at this point in time. Kansas will get a lot more votes in at this point, and the state will start to look, I think, more red. Louisiana will automatically be called for both the Senate and presidential races. Michigan, at this point, has already been called, in my book, I'm willing to bet. Nebraska, we've got 3 races which will be called, and the special election will look red, but a very competitive red. The Senate election will be called immediately. Sorry, I lost track of my place. New Mexico is next. New Mexico, auto call for the Democrats. No concerns there if you're a Democrat. And New York will also be called. North Dakota and South Dakota, we get more votes, but it's only reassuring that the state is red. Now we start getting our Texas votes. And Texas is going to be looking a little bit blue to start with. I think with the high voter turnout... Wait, not blue, a little red. I don't know where I got my info from. We'll be looking red, but a very competitive red. Many states are going to start off looking red, keep in mind. But Texas is going to be looking very close at the presidential level and competitive, but not necessarily close at the Senate level. In Wisconsin, we also start getting a few more votes in. And in this case, Wisconsin is going to be looking... Initially, it's going to be alternating between red and blue, but Democrats are going to have a distinct edge in Wisconsin. And last, we have Wyoming, which will be an instant call in both the presidency and the Senate, as well as we're going to have some more updates for further out states. Pennsylvania, at this point, as they start to count more ballots, is going to start looking a little bit bluish at the presidential level. Maine's 2nd district will also start to look a little red starting off, just for a brief moment. Around this point in time, it should. Because now we'll get a bunch of the rural votes pop in. Maine's 2nd district is one of the few districts where the rural vote can take a little while to filter through. And you start off with some decent urban votes. But at this point, it's going to the situation will look even worse for Susan Collins, as it's going to become more obvious the Democrats are in the lead. And the Senate race in North Carolina should be called at this point in time. Georgia is going to continue looking competitive. For right now, because Raphael Warnock is due to win Senate elections, it's going to become clear it's going to a Democratic versus Republican runoff, and Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, is beating both of his opponents in the upcoming special election matchups. I will give this seat to the Democrats. I'm not saying, but you shouldn't consider it a solid seat for either party. As such, I'll actually leave it as toss-up, now that I'm thinking about it. But Georgia's special Senate election, is actually going to look a bit bluish. I could see South Carolina at this point in time also looking a bit more bluish. The general election, not sure. But Florida will now start to look a little bit more competitive again. So we're going to see some weakening down here for the Republicans. And Ohio will, at this point, I'm guessing, probably flip back to being a bit more tilt red. Ohio's going to be really switching back and forth over the course of the night. Now, for the 10 p.m. poll closings, which are going to flip, in my opinion, quite a few states. Did I accidentally miss Minnesota? It just occurred to me. Yes, I did. Sorry, Minnesota was another 9 p.m. poll closing. That's going to be called for the Democrats in both races. At this point, I could see a call made for the Senate saying Democrats are going to win, but no guarantee on that. So 10 p.m. poll closings. We first get Idaho. Idaho will instantly be called for the Republicans. Iowa. Iowa will be very competitive. However, in the presidential election, Donald Trump will have a distinct lead, while in the Senate election, Greenfield will have a distinct lead. In Montana, instantly called for Republican for the presidency. At the governor's at the match for the governor's mansion, the Republican will look like he's a bit ahead, about the same as, but ahead. While in the Senate race, the Steve Daines, the incumbent Republican, is going to have a slight lead, but emphasis on slight, especially since with Montana we're just going to get a front load of ballots that were submitted early. Next, we have Nevada. Nevada will be called, in my opinion, instantly, as will Oregon, both for the Democrats. I could see Nevada taking taking maybe 20 minutes before the call is made, but given the fact I'm working on half-hour increments here, it will, over the first half hour, be called safe for the Democrats, as will Oregon. And at this point, if the Democrats are holding the leads I'm expecting them to be holding, we would see a call made for the Senate at this point. And lastly, we have Utah called for the Republican immediately. Now we're going to have some changes in our other races. Arizona at the presidential level is now going to be looking distinctly more Democratic as we really get the ballot counting underway, as will Wisconsin, probably not call territory yet, and Pennsylvania is going to look noticeably more competitive. At this point, I think North Carolina would be called. While ballots are still being counted in Georgia and Florida, I could see Georgia entering a territory where it might flip, as could Florida. But we're going to assume Florida is a bit redder than Georgia, and as such, both are still being competitive, both are still being counted. At this point, also, I know I keep saying at this point, I'm sorry if that gets frustrating. First, we're going to do Maine's 2nd District, which at this point, keep saying it, is going to go very blue. All of a sudden, it's going to be really clear Democrats are ahead. And Maine's Senate election will be called at this point. The 2nd District will be very in favor of the Democrats for about another half hour, then maybe at about 10:20, it will also be called for the Democrats, so it'll rapidly flip from 10 p.m. to about 10:20. Pennsylvania, like I said, will start looking more secure for the Democrats. As for Ohio, it's either going, at this moment, it will either break hard red or break hard blue. No middle ground. By my prediction, it's going to break hard red, so I'll call Ohio for the Republicans, but it could very well go the other direction. It's been a very competitive state where both candidates have polled well. As for Texas, at the presidential level at this point, I'm willing to bet it's going to go tilt blue, and people are going to start going, oh, Joe Biden has the lead. Could he win Texas? And that will be everyone's obsession for the next hour or so. While at the Senate level, Republicans will maintain their distance, and that's going to start to hurt them. South Carolina will also tilt back to the Republican Party at this point in time, while Georgia will solidify for the Democrats, making it clear South Carolina may be a loss, but have to keep watching. Oh, and Colorado will also be called at this point, as should Arizona. Both have stupidly high favorability for the Democrats, and should reflect that in the numbers. Now to our 11 p.m. poll closings. California is called for the Democrats, and with this, actually at 10 p.m. technically, the presidency should be called for Joe Biden. Washington also comes in and goes for the Democrats. We will get to Alaska and Hawaii in a moment. Arizona should be called for Joe Biden at this point, as should Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. At this point, it's going to be a sudden, very rapid wrap-up, as it becomes clear Joe Biden has enough of a lead, Donald Trump can't match up with him. Georgia will start looking a lot less competitive in the presidential election, while I am imagining the Senate election will be called at this point for the Democrats. In Iowa, it's going to hold. I think Iowa's going to go the longest out of the states. And at this point, also, North Carolina, I keep saying at this point, I don't know why I have that verbal tick today. Nebraska's 2nd District will go into the competitive category as well. we go to wrap up our evening with the 12 p.m. poll closings of Alaska and Hawaii. Both will automatically be called for their default state at the presidential level, but at the Senate level, we're going to have Alaska looking very competitive, though favorable to the Republican. We'll also have Kansas get called for the Republican at this point in time. It might have been called sooner, but I could see there being enough of an enough of a tight race that it doesn't get called for a while. Montana's Senate election at this point either is going to be tilting more blue, which I actually think, after reviewing some data, it very well could be. While Iowa, like I said, is going to hold these numbers, which will eventually lead to a call of Iowa being blue at the Senate level and red at the presidential level. We'll also probably see Georgia get called, as will Florida. Right now, I'm actually feeling like Florida may very well go for Trump. Like I said, this is going to be arbitrary based on the day, and there could very well be a case where Biden wins Florida too. It just keeps going back and forth, and Democrats usually have a 3-point, so usually in the polls have a 3-point advantage that isn't actually there. So right now we're going to say Florida goes red. Also could change. And as the night wraps up, Nebraska's 2nd District will be called for, not Democrats, the Republicans. Montana gets called for the Democrats. South Carolina gets called for the Republicans, as does Texas and Alaska. And Texas at the presidential level will end up being called for the Democrats. But as you can see, by the time it's going to take a while, but around 10 p.m. is when we should know who's won the election, and it should be Joe Biden. And Democrats should take control of the Senate. So, theoretically, after the special election with a 55-seat majority. So, with all that being said, if you liked the video, drop a like down below and also leave a comment. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content comes out. If you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I do have Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description. And as always, and most importantly, have a wonderful day.